Some people build to keep the cold out. She was building to keep something in. I just didn't understand what yet. The first time I saw her, she was hammering a warped board into a wall with a river rock because she had no hammer. The board split. She picked up a different broken board and started again. No cursing. No crying. Just that flat, patient thud of stone on wood over and over, like a heartbeat that had decided it wasn't going to stop no matter what the world took from it. I was 51 years old and I had buried a wife, a good horse, and every soft thing I used to be. I told myself I'd seen it all out here. Then I watched a woman with nothing rebuild a dead man's house one broken board at a time, and I found out I hadn't seen anything at all. This is the story of the winter I stopped counting my losses and started counting hers, of a decision that could have cost me the little I had left, and of the moment a proud, grieving stranger looked at what I'd done and something in her face, something she'd been holding shut for a long, long time, finally cracked open. Stay with me. It doesn't go the way you think. It goes better and it goes worse, and by the end you'll understand why I've never told anybody the whole of it until now. I keep a ledger. Have since the November my wife died, when I discovered that numbers were the only things left in the world that would hold still and let me hold onto them. 40 head of cattle, 211 fence posts on the North Line, $9.40 in the coffee tin. Meg used to laugh at me for it. Eli, you'd tally the stars if you thought you could sell them, and after she was gone I kept the habit the way a man keeps limping on a leg that healed crooked. It hurt. It also held me up. So when I say it was the 11th of October, and that the wind had turned the kind of mean that means real winter is 3 weeks out and not a day more, understand that I know those things because I wrote them down that night with a hand that wouldn't quite work right. My hand doesn't shake for cattle prices. It shook for her. I found her by accident. I was riding the far edge of my grazing lease, the useless rocky quarter where a family named Halloran had tried to homestead 6 years back and failed the way most people fail out here, slowly, and then all at once. Their cabin had burned in the trouble 2 summers ago, when half the territory was chasing ghosts and the other half was becoming them. Nobody had touched the ruin since. Blackened sill logs, a stone chimney standing alone like a headstone, a scatter of boards the fire had spat back out half-eaten. I only rode past it because a heifer had wandered, and I was cursing that heifer with real feeling when I heard the sound. Thud, thud, thud. Slow, deliberate, wrong for that empty place. I reined in behind a stand of juniper and I watched, because a man who rides up loud on the unexpected out here is a man who gets shot, and I had done too much surviving to die stupid at 51. She was standing in the ruin of the Halloran cabin, and she was building. That's the only word for it. She'd cleared one corner down to the old foundation stones, and against them she'd stood up the least burned of the fallen boards, and she was driving a warped plank into place with a rock the size of both her fists. She was small, not frail, small the way a hawk is small, all economy and no waste, and she wore a man's coat far too big for her, cinched with rope, and her black hair was cut short in a way I would later understand meant mourning. Chiricahua. I knew it the way you know weather. In that country in that year, a person like her being out and alone and off the reservation was not a curiosity. It was a death sentence walking. The board split under the rock. A long white wound opened down the grain and the top half sheared away and fell. I waited for it. The throwing down of the rock, the sitting in the dirt, the giving up that I would have understood, that I'd half done myself the winter Meg passed, sitting in my own kitchen unable to figure out why a man should bother to light a fire for one. It didn't come. She looked at the ruined board for a moment. Then she set it aside carefully, not flinging it, like even a broken thing deserved to be put down gently, and she reached into the pile and chose another, and she raised the rock and the thudding started again. Thud, 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 patient as rain, patient as grief, patient as something I didn't have a name for and wouldn't find one for until it was almost too late. I am not proud of what I did next, which was nothing. I turned my horse and I rode home, and I did not sleep, and at some point in the black middle of the night I lit the lamp and opened my ledger and I wrote, "Woman at Halloran Place. Apache. Building." And then I sat looking at those 4 words like they were a sum I couldn't make balance, because they weren't cattle and they weren't dollars and they wouldn't hold still. And I understood, dimly, the way you understand a change in the weather before the sky shows it, that my careful counted life had just had something poured into it that I could not measure and could not put back. I told myself it wasn't my business. A man says that to himself a lot out here. Sometimes it's even true. I went back the next day. I told myself it was the heifer. She'd built more. Overnight, or in the dawn, a second course of boards atop the first. So the corner of a wall was rising now, crooked and ugly and standing, which was more than could be said for most of what people tried to raise in that country. She was crouched by a little fire that gave almost no smoke. She knew how to make a fire that wouldn't call anyone, and that told me a great deal about how long she'd been running and how. And she was doing something with her hands over the flames, and it was only when the small dark shape beside her moved that my heart went cold and then hot. A child. A boy, maybe 5, maybe 6, thin as the boards, wrapped in a blanket that had once been red. He was watching his mother's hands, and she was making him something to eat out of not very much, and she was talking to him low in a language I didn't have, and the boy laughed. That laugh. I have heard a lot of sounds in my life. Cattle in a storm. A woman I loved coughing herself empty in a cold bedroom while I stood useless in the door. But that little boy's laugh in that dead, burned place in that killing season, over that fire that wouldn't smoke, that undid something in me that had been knotted shut for 2 years. Because here is what I understood all at once, watching them. She wasn't building for herself. A woman running for her life travels light and hides in rock. She doesn't stop to raise walls. Walls are slow and walls are visible and walls will get you killed. She was building because that boy needed walls. Because winter was coming and a child cannot winter in the open, and she had looked at the whole vast murderous emptiness of that territory and decided that the one thing she could give him, the one wall she could stand between him and the cold, she would build out of broken boards and a rock, alone, in the ruin of a dead man's dream, while the entire world would kill her for the trying. I have made a lot of decisions in my life. Most of them I made with my ledger open, weighing the cost. This one I made with the ledger closed, which is to say I made it the way Meg would have wanted me to make everything, and never got to see me do. But I didn't make it that day. That day I was still a coward with good reasons. I watched a while longer and the boy finished eating, and the woman looked up sharp, sudden, straight at the juniper where I was, as if she'd known the whole time, as if she'd let me watch, and our eyes met across 60 feet of ruin, and I saw in her face no fear at all. That was the thing that broke me in the end, not sorrow, not pleading. She looked at me the way a person looks at whether they can't change. Here is another thing that has come to take from me. Let it come then. She stood slow and put herself between me and the boy, and she picked up the rock not as a tool now, and she waited to see what kind of ending I was. And God help me, I rode away again. I want to tell you I rode away to spare her the fright of a strange rider closing in. That's part of it. But the truer part is that I was afraid, not of her, of it, of what helping her would mean. In that country that year, a white rancher who sheltered a Chiricahua off the reservation was not a good Samaritan. He was, in the eyes of the fort and the town and every hard man with a grievance and a rifle, a traitor of the worst kind, and there were folks who'd have burned my place to the sill logs and called it justice. I had 40 head of cattle and $9.40 and a name that people still nodded to. It wasn't much. It was all I had. And I sat my horse at the top of the rise and I did the arithmetic, the old, cold ledger arithmetic of what a man might lose. Then I looked back one more time. She'd already turned away from me. She decided I was nothing, a writer who came and looked and left, the way the buzzards came and looked and left. She had gone back to her wall. Thud, thud, thud. Building the world's smallest fortress against the world's largest cruelty, one broken board at a time, refusing me the satisfaction of being the thing that stopped her. I rode home. I did the arithmetic all night. And here is the number I couldn't make the ledger swallow, the one that kept coming up no matter how I ran the columns. A wall like that, built by hand with a rock, one board a night, it would take her until deep winter to close in even one room. And the boards were bad. Half of them would split. She'd need proper lumber and she didn't have it. She'd need nails and she didn't have those either. I'd seen her wedging boards, notching them, tying them, doing everything a person can do without the sixpenny nails that a man like me had a whole keg of, sitting useless in my barn since I'd stopped building anything I cared about. I had nails, she had a boy who laughed. I have never in my life had a sum come out so plain. I didn't sleep. Toward morning I got up and I went to the barn and I stood in front of that keg of nails a long time. And I want to be honest with you because Meg always said honesty was the only thing I owned outright. I almost didn't do it. I stood there and I heard, clear as anything, the voices of every man I'd drink coffee with in town. And I felt the whole weight of what I was and where I lived and when. And I understood that carrying that keg out to my wagon was going to cost me something I might not get back. A man doesn't come home again from a thing like this. Not all the way. Then I thought about her face, that terrible, patient, ready face, looking at me across the ruin, and deciding I was just more weather. And I found I very badly did not want to be more weather. I loaded the nails. I loaded a hammer, a good one, and a saw, and my late wife's heavy wool coat that had been hanging on its peg for 2 years because I couldn't give it away and couldn't stand to see it. A coat that would fit a small woman a great deal better than a man's ruined cast-off. I loaded a sack of beans, and the side of bacon I'd been saving, and a tin of the hard candy I bought every fall and never ate because there was no child in my house to eat it. I loaded all of it in the gray before dawn like a man packing to run, except I was packing to stay in a decision, which is the harder kind of staying. Then I sat on the wagon seat with the reins in my hands and the cold coming up pink in the east, and I did not move, because I realized I had no idea what I would say. What does a man say? I watched you and I'm sorry. I have nails. There aren't words for driving up to a person you left alone twice and asking to be let in on the third try. I was still sitting there working it when I heard the horse. Not mine. Coming up the road from town fast in the half-dark, and I knew before I could see him who rode that gray gelding at that hour and no other, and my stomach went to water. Deputy Coyle. Coyle who had lost a brother in the trouble and had never once let anyone forget it. Coyle who patrolled the reservation line like it owed him money. Coyle, riding hard up my road at dawn, toward me and my loaded wagon and past me, I realized, past my place entirely, on the road that bent north. North, toward the old Halloran place. I sat frozen with a keg of nails and a dead woman's coat and a tin of candy for a boy I'd never spoken to, and I watched the deputy ride toward the one thing in the world I had finally, too late, decided to protect, and I understood that whatever I was going to do about any of it, I had until he got there to do it, and he was already halfway gone. I put the whip to my team. I have never done that before or since. Those horses had never felt it, and they leapt like the devil was behind them, and the wagon banged and thundered off the road and out across the broken country on the shortcut. Only a man who'd counted every foot of his own land would know. The shortcut that might, if the arithmetic was right, if I didn't break a wheel or my neck, put me over the last rise a half-minute before Coyle came up the road. A half-minute to do what I didn't know. I only knew I was through being weather. The wagon crested the rise on 2 wheels, and I hauled the team down so hard they nearly sat, and there it was below me. The burned cabin, the crooked new wall standing brave and pitiful in the dawn. The fire gone cold and covered, she'd heard the hooves. Of course she had. And the woman standing dead center of the ruin with the boy shoved behind her and the rock in her fist, facing the road, facing north, facing Coyle, who was just then coming up it at a canter with his rifle already out of its scabbard and lying across his saddle bow. I want you to understand the shape of the next 30 seconds, because I've turned them over every day of my life since, and I still don't know that I could do them again. Coyle saw her first. He hadn't seen me. I'd come cross-country, and the junipers hid the wagon, and his whole attention was fixed on the ruin like a dog on a rat. I saw him check the gray. I saw him settle in the saddle the particular way a man settles when he has decided that what's in front of him is not a person but a problem, and that the problem has a simple solution, and that no one for 20 miles will ever ask him about it. I had seen that settle before. I knew exactly how much time it bought her. None. So I did the only thing my body would do without my leave. I stood up on the wagon seat and I bellowed his name. Coyle. It came out of me like something tearing. He jerked around. The rifle came up and swung toward the rise, and for one long white instant it was pointed at me, and I stood there in the open on my own wagon with my hands wide and empty and my heart going like the rock on the board, and I watched him recognize me, and I watched the rifle waver. Eli, his voice carried thin across the cold. Eli Renner, the hell are you doing out here? Get down, man. There's a hostel in that ruin. There's a woman, I said, and I was climbing down off the wagon now, walking toward him, walking between him and the ruin, which is a thing you should never do to an armed man, and I did it slow and deliberate with my empty hands out. There's a woman and a child, Coyle, and they're on my lease. He blinked, the rifle sagged an inch. Renner, that's a Chiricahua. Off reservation. You know what that means, you know the standing order. I know she's hungry and half froze and been living on my land under my leave, I said, and every word was a lie and every word came out steady as fence posts, and I did not know I had it in me, and I have never been so afraid or so calm at the same time in my life. She works for me, her and the boy, camp cook. I've been meaning to come report it and I clean forgot with the roundup. It was a terrible lie. It was a lie with 100 holes, and Coyle wasn't a stupid man. He sat his gray and he looked at me and he looked past me at her. She hadn't moved. She stood there with the rock and the boy and that flat, weathering face, understanding not one word of the English but understanding every ounce of what was happening in it. And I watched Coyle do his own arithmetic. 2 years of grievance on one side. On the other, a neighbor he'd known 10 years, a white man of good name standing in the cold swearing to a thing, and the paperwork and the trouble and the questions that shooting a rancher's cook would raise, even a cook like this one. You're lying to me, Eli, he said quietly. Maybe, I said. You want to be the man who finds out by killing them and being wrong, in front of me. The wind blew. Somewhere the boy made a small sound and the woman's hand went back to touch him, quiet him, without her eyes ever leaving Coyle. And I saw the deputy see that gesture, the pure, ordinary motherhood of it, and I saw something in him that the grief hadn't yet eaten all the way through. You'll register 'em at the fort, he said at last, and it wasn't a question. It was a man building himself a door to leave through. Both of 'em. Name, band, the whole of it. You'll do it inside the week, or by God I'll come back and I won't be asking. Inside the week, I said. He looked at me a long moment more. Then he shoved the rifle back in its scabbard with more force than it needed, and he wheeled the gray, and he said one more thing before he rode, said it low, so it was only for me, and I have never decided whether it was a threat or a warning or just a tired man telling the truth. They'll take everything you got over this, Renner. Every last thing. You watch. And then he was gone down the north road, and the sound of him faded, and I was standing in the ruin of the Halloran cabin with my heart trying to climb out of my chest, and a Chiricahua woman looking at me over a rock, and neither of us moved for what felt like the whole turning of the earth. She spoke first, in English. Careful, accented, but clear. And it hit me like cold water that she'd understood, that she'd had English all along and let me not know it, the way she'd let me watch, giving away nothing until she chose. Why, she said, not thank you, not who are you, just why. And I found I didn't have the lie for that one. I didn't have anything but the truth, which I'm not built to say out loud, so it came out clumsy and sideways and too plain. My wife's been dead 2 years, I said. I heard your boy laugh. She looked at me. The rock came down slow to her side. Something moved behind her eyes, not softening. I want to be clear. She did not go soft. A woman like that does not go soft for a stranger and would be a fool to, but something reassessing. Some hard, careful recalculation, as if I too were weather and she was trying to read what season I'd turned into. You lied to that man for us, she said. Now they will hurt you. Maybe, I said again. Maybe, she repeated flat, and I swear to you there was the ghost of something dry in it, something that in another life, another world might have grown up into humor. She looked at my wagon, at the keg, at the hammer and the saw and the sack and the coat, my Meg's gray wool coat lying folded on the seat where anyone could see it for what it was, a dead woman's coat brought for a living one. And she went very still looking at that coat, and then she looked back at me, and for the first time the flatness cracked, just at the corners, just for a breath. You bring nails, she said. I got a whole keg, I said, and a hammer that ain't a rock. And the boy who'd been hiding behind her the whole time, who had a mother's whole life crouched in front of him like a wall. The boy peeked around her leg and looked at me with enormous dark eyes, and I remembered the candy. And I don't know what possessed me, but I reached slow into my coat and brought out the tin and worked it open, and held out one hard red sweet on my flat palm the way you'd offer sugar to a wary horse. And I did not step closer. I just held it there in the cold with my arm out until it ached. The boy looked at the candy. He looked at his mother. She said something to him low, and it was not no, and he came out from behind her one careful step at a time, this thin, brave child in a faded red blanket, and he crossed the whole ruin to me, and he took the candy off my palm quick as a bird and jumped back, and then he put it in his mouth, and his whole small face changed, that helpless startled delight of a child tasting sweetness, a thing that has nothing to do with wars or borders or standing orders, and he looked up at his mother and he laughed. That laugh again, in the cold over the sugar. And I looked up from the boy to the woman, and I found that the hard, flat weathering had gone out of her face entirely, all at once, the way ice goes off a pond in the first true sun, not slow, all at once, a whole sheet of it letting go, and she had her hand pressed over her mouth, and above her hand her eyes were wet and shining and fixed on her son eating candy from the hand of a stranger who had just risked everything he owned to keep him breathing. And I understood that I was watching something that had been shut and locked for a very long time finally, helplessly, come open. She didn't thank me. She never once in all the weeks that came after said the words thank you, and I came to understand it wasn't pride, or not only pride. It was that the thing she felt was too big for words that small. Instead she took her hand from her mouth and she said, rough, his name is Tenny. And then, after a moment, harder like it cost her, I am Naya. Eli, I said. I know, she said. The deputy said it 4 times. And there it was again, that dry ghost of a thing at the corner of her mouth, and I laughed surprised right out of myself. And she almost let it become a real one. And behind us the crooked wall stood in the rising sun, and I understood that I had just walked all the way through the door out of my old counted careful life, and there was no walking back. And I found, standing there in the ruin with the nails and the coat and the boy and the woman and the enormous terrifying open sky, that I did not want to. We built that day. I'll not pretend it was easy or that she trusted me. She watched my hands every second and kept the boy always to her far side and slept, I later learned, with a knife she'd made from a barrel hoop. But she took the hammer. She took the good boards I hauled from my own barn that afternoon, real milled lumber, and she showed me her own joints and notches. And they were good, better than mine, quick and clever and strong. And I saw that she had built things before in her old life, the one the world had burned. And we worked side by side without much talk, her showing me her way and me showing her the keg. Until the light went and the one wall had become two, and the corner of a real room stood up square against the dark, where a burned ruin had been. I drove home in the black. I did the day's tally in my ledger by lamplight, 32 boards, 1 keg nails half gone, 1 coat given, and then under it in a hand that didn't shake this time, I wrote the 2 things I actually wanted to keep, Naya, Tenny. I looked at the names a long time. They held still, and I understood that for the first time in 2 years I had written down something in that book that I was not afraid of losing, and in the same breath understood, cold, that I had never in my life had more to lose, and that Coyle was right, and that somewhere in town the arithmetic of my ruin was already being added up by men who did not know her name and would not have cared to learn it. I closed the ledger. I went to bed, and for the first time since Meg, I lay in the dark and was not counting my losses. I was counting the days until winter, and how many walls we had left to raise before it came. Word travels in a small country faster than any horse. I had until the week was out before I even had to do anything. Coyle saw to that, or someone did, and by the 3rd day, there wasn't a man in town who didn't know that Eli Renner had a Chiricahua woman and her whelp living on his lease, and had lied to a deputy's face to keep them. I felt it the next time I rode in for supplies. The nods that used to come easy didn't come. The storekeeper weighed my flour like he was weighing evidence. 2 men I'd branded cattle beside for a decade found the far end of the boardwalk to be on when I passed. Nobody said a word. Out here the worst things are the ones nobody says. I put it in the ledger like everything else, cost of Naya, running total, but there's a kind of loss you can't tally, and I was learning it late in life. The loss of being of a place, of belonging to the men around you. I'd been a widower 2 years and thought I understood alone. I hadn't. Alone is one thing. Being made alone on purpose by people looking through you, that's another, and it's colder. I never told her. She knew anyway. Naya knew the shape of the world she was in far better than I did. I was a fool discovering whether she'd lived in her whole life. But she watched me come back from town one gray afternoon with my face wrong, and she read it, and that night by the fire, we shared a fire by then, careful, the 3 of us, and it was the warmest room I'd sat in since Meg. She said, quiet. You can stop. You have done enough. We will go when the walls are up. You do not have to lose your people for us. And Tenny, who had learned some English off me by then the way small boys learn anything, quick and sideways, looked up from the horseshoe he was playing with and said, in his high, clear little voice, "Don't go, Eli," meaning don't make us go, and looked at his mother like she'd said something frightening. And I watched Naya's face do the thing it did now sometimes when the boy caught her out, that helpless crack. "I ain't got people," I heard myself say. "I got you 2 and 40 cows. And the cows ain't much company." And I meant it as dry, meant it to make her mouth do the ghost thing, but it came out too true, and it landed too heavy, and the 3 of us sat there in the firelight with the truth of it while the wind worked at the new walls and found them, for the first time, solid. We finished the roof in the 3rd week of November, one day before the first snow. I have built a lot of things in my life, and I have never been so proud of anything as I was of that ugly, crooked, mismatched little house rising out of a burned ruin, half broken Halloran boards and half my good barn lumber, half her clever joints and half my nails. A house that was more a decision than a dwelling, standing there square and stubborn under a sky gone the color of a healing bruise. When the last shingle went on, Tenny let out a whoop and ran 3 circles around it in the cold, and Naya stood in the doorway of a home she had built with her own hands out of ruin and refusal, and she put her hand on the frame, just rested it there, flat, the way she'd rested it on the boy's shoulder that first morning, and she was quiet a long time. Then she looked at me, and she said the closest thing to thank you she ever said, which was, Meg would be glad you built again. I hadn't told her Meg's name. I'd said my wife. She'd heard it once, weeks back, and kept it, and given it back to me now on purpose in the doorway as a gift. And I had to turn and look hard at the horizon for a while, and she let me, and neither of us said anything else, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough. The snow came that night. It came soft, and then it came serious, and for 2 days the world was white and silent, and we were shut in. I'd meant to ride home and got caught, and slept in the new house by the fire with the boy between us like a small furnace, and it was the most peace I have known before or since. 48 hours of snow and firelight, and a child's breathing, and a woman's careful thawing presence. A stolen scrap of a life that none of us had any right to expect. I should stop there. If this were a made-up story, I'd stop there, in the snow, with the fire. But you asked me for the true one, and the true one has more winter in it than that. They came on the 4th day after the snow, when the tracks would show plain. Not Coyle. Coyle, whatever he was, had drawn his line and stayed behind it. These were others, 4 men from town, men with old grievances and new liquor and the particular courage that comes of numbers and a righteous story about themselves. I was there, thank God I was there, out at the woodpile when I saw them come over the rise, and I knew what they were the way Naya had known what I might be that first morning. More weather, the killing kind. I won't give you the whole of it. Some things a man tells and some he only carries. I'll tell you that I stood in front of that house the way I'd stood in front of Coyle, empty-handed, and that this time empty hands weren't enough, and that it got bad, and that I took a thing in that fight I still feel when the cold comes, 3 ribs and something in my shoulder that never set right. I'll tell you that Naya did not stay behind the wall she'd built, that she came out of that door with the barrel-hoop knife and a fury that stopped grown men, a woman defending the one square of the earth that was hers, and that the sight of her, of us, the crazy rancher and the Chiricahua woman standing shoulder to shoulder in the snow in front of a house made of broken boards, took something out of those men that their liquor couldn't put back. Cruelty needs its target to be one thing. We were being the wrong thing at them. It confused them, and it shamed the least far gone of them, and there was a moment, a long teetering moment, where it could have gone either way. And it went the way it went because of Tenny. The boy came out. Against every order, against his mother's scream, the boy came out of the house and ran to me where I was down on one knee in the red snow, and he put his small body between me and the nearest man, this 6-year-old child shielding a beaten-up old rancher with nothing but himself, and he shouted at them in his high, cracking voice the only 2 English words that mattered. He's ours. And it broke the thing. I saw it break. I saw 4 grown men look at a child claiming a bleeding white rancher as his own, in the snow, in front of a house that shouldn't exist, and I saw them each become, for one unbearable second, just a person who'd once been a boy, and one of them said, "Lo, Christ, Amos, let's go." And another said nothing and turned his horse, and it fell apart the way a mob always falls apart when the story it told itself stops holding, and they went. They went down the rise and out of the white and out of this story, and they never came back, though the cost of them stayed with me in 3 ribs and a shoulder and a name in town I never fully got back, and I have never once totaled that cost in any ledger because some prices you don't add up. You just pay them, and you keep the thing you paid for. I knelt in the snow and Tenny had his arms around my neck and Naya came and knelt too, and she took my face in both her hands, the first time she ever touched me, and she looked at me with the last of that hard flat weathering gone forever out of her, gone for good, and there were tears on her face freezing in the cold, and she didn't say thank you. She never did. She said my name, just that. Eli, like it was a whole sentence, like it was the only word she had that was big enough. They stayed. Not that winter only, the fort never got its registration, and Coyle, to his credit or his shame, never came to collect, and the paper never got made, and a hard, clever woman and a bright, quick boy simply became, over years, the 2 people the country half forgot to hate and I could not have lived without. Tenny grew up tall. He calls me a name in his mother's language that Naya told me once means something like the one who stayed. And I have never asked her to translate it exact because I'm afraid I'd cry and I'm too old for it. I still keep the ledger, old habit, crooked leg. But I'll tell you what I've noticed. These late years, sitting by the fire in a house made of broken boards with a woman who took 30 winters to say she loved me and said it in the end, the way she said everything, sideways and true. I don't count losses anymore. I ran out of them the day I started counting the other thing, and I have never gone back. And if you ask me now, old and mended, crooked and warm, what a man's life comes to, I won't give you a number. I'll tell you it comes to a laugh over a fire that wouldn't smoke. It comes to one hard red candy on a cold flat palm. It comes to a boy who ran the wrong way toward the danger because he decided you were his. It comes to whatever you're stubborn enough to build back up out of the broken pieces after the world has burned it down.